great pleasure, and we're delighted to bring along Ming Tan. Thank you very much for coming along today. Ming is the Chief Data and Analytics Officer and Interim Chief Digital and Information Officer at NHS England. And we're doing our opening. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me. My first time. Nice to be here. And it's a lovely building, isn't it? So I've got some slides, only a few. Thought we'd start with an intro. So I think I'm going to talk a bit about attended and how we're going to address it. I think the most important thing for me is, most of you will know this, technology's there. It's not about technology. The changes that we're trying to make are very much about how we want to change the service and how we actually provide services for patients that do better good. And I think we spend so much time talking about the tech and the architecture and this thing versus that thing. What's really amazed me in the last kind of year or so is how far the technology has come, how much of the agentic work is actually possible. What we need to do as an NHS is very much make sure that we design different functional capabilities in a way that they interact. So it's not just about interoperability, it's actually how we do the architecture in different layers so that we are not locked into a single technology, that we actually use data, we actually expose the data, bring forward the data to support decision-making and actions. We do a lot of stuff, you know, in my previous role as data and analytics. We do so much stuff on dashboards that we look at this data and we'll sit back and admire how we've done the charts and how we've linked different data sets. But actually the most important thing is what you're going to do about it. What actions are you going to take? So for my colleagues in data and analytics, it's very much about let's bring stuff together so that we can actually use it, the decisions are actually intuitive to receive it, and then that we make the most of that change. Just going to play this video. Some of you will have seen it before, so apologies, but anyhow, this will work. Actually playing on my screen. We're almost there anyway. Basically, the last bit was just to say it is all about mindset and how we actually look at the adoption of technology rather than just blaming the tech. So I'll just go back to full screen. Okay, so in the 10-year plan, we had a number of areas for focus for us. It's very much around how do we adopt the NHS app? And it's not about the app, it's actually how do we reimagine what we're doing for the NHS? How can we make sure that we have a single service that allows us to triage differently, to create digital pathways? How do we really use that as the entry point to the NHS as a safe, secure place? How do we use the app to really drive knowledge about the NHS services? Maybe you will all have seen if you Google stuff around treatment, you can get some really good stuff. You can take you to TikTok and some less good stuff. So we want the NHS app to be the trusted place where you can get advice around your treatments and service. We want to have guidance in the app so that it supports patients. So as we redesign the pathways, can we have a digital assistant that helps you know where you are, where you should go next, when you should be getting your results? So that's kind of the reimagining of the app. And every time I say that, people will say, what is it? This is about focusing the effort on the 80%. So the 20% can have better tailored, targeted support. So for those that don't have access to apps and stuff, we can actually spread some of our services to make sure that we deliver services more appropriately for them. So by targeting, we can actually make sure that we actually address both parts of the population. The next thing is really about the single patient record. And there's been so much written about it. There's so much hype, if you like, around the single patient record. What it's really about is we have a lot of information collected in NHS systems that don't talk to each other. You're a patient, if you go from your GP to, they've referred you to a consultant. Those two systems, do you know how they talk? Some of you probably will know. They talk via a PDF. In this day and age, we're still sending either paper or PDFs between primary care and secondary care. Doesn't talk properly. We've tried to do some of that integration. Lots of reasons why it's hard, but that's what some of those problems we're solving. And then if you take a test in the community, if you take a test in the community, quite often they're repeated in the hospital. And that's taking up resources, and a lot of our waiting list time will be reduced by just understanding what those things are. And the reason is because we've set up the NHS really around those services, not around the individuals that use the service. So in a similar way, the banks have done the revolution around a single voice of the customer. We need a single voice of the patient. We need a 360 of where that patients are going, what they're doing in the NHS, and therefore how we can help them do that. I'll have a bit more about what we're doing with that, but very much we're really trying to look at three kind of proofs of concepts. They're not solutions, they're proofs of concepts, three different ways of getting to that end result. We've invested a lot in shared care records. You've got John here, we can build out from there maybe. We've invested quite a lot on a data platform like FTP that should start there. We've also done some work that Lee's done in the which are around the virtual record. So how can we use what we've already done to actually find out what the solution for that is in the future that will allow us to connect? And it may be a bit of this and a bit of that and a few new things, right? It's not going to be one big system as much as, the big providers would like us to say it's a one big system. Our trial and tribulation is to really say, what's the accelerated journey? How do we get our architecture in a way that we are really managing an event-based, everything that people come touching the service are doing, that signals to other parts of the service so that we can take proactive activity. That's the reason for doing the single patient record. Within that, we'll be driving use cases.
Sorry, your Microsoft Teams messages are coming up on the screen. You might just want to just spewing.
I'm going to leave it.
Okay.
Come out, it'll just mess up. That's the morning, isn't it? Oh, sorry.
I think you need to turn those off.
So, actually, where's the guy? Should I convert back to the standard one? Anyway, And then really around federated data platform, we've invested in the federated data platform. We've actually got some really good results at from our operations teams at Trust. We're now seeing the value of how you could have probably 6 or 7 things that will help run hospitals better. But also the ability for us to go back to, I was just going to convert back to your machine because my getting pop-ups, sorry. So it's very much how do we maximize the use of that investment, but drive very much forward use cases, free up the systems that are already on federated data platform to use that technology for what they need for their trust, right? So it's not about a cookie cutter thing. You know, we do one thing nationally and everyone has to do it. It's much more, we've made those licenses available. How do you get best value out of those licenses locally? And we've got lots of things that we can do for productivity. So some of the use cases we've got really around helping coordinate patient journeys within the hospital, within a cluster of hospitals and within an ICB, so an integrated care system. How do we make sure that those messages and workflow, I don't know, we spend lots and lots of hours chasing activities, you know, bringing multidisciplinary teams together, but each of those fires an email that goes to 25 people, 25 people then respond, some poor soul's got to then work out what the answer is. You can dump that into a system and let the system work some of that through. It means that we can actually be a bit more proactive. We can plan forward our activities and make sure we utilise the resources we have in a much more planned way. I started my career really, spent part of my time in Accenture doing supply chain. Health is a logistics supply chain, but we just don't look at it like that. We think about patient activity, we think about trust activity. It's a supply chain, it needs to connect. And in supply chains, you have integrated systems that allow you to visualize and follow and track. So if you think about your parcels, you know, you've got lots of different companies, but they all interact so that you know where your parcel is and where you want it to be left or when you're going to be at home. That's what we need for healthcare. We need patients to be able to say, I want my appointment through the app when at a time that suits me, rather than suiting my test. Going back one. Right. The last thing is about health data research. That's very much about all the data that we collect and how can the NHS contribute as a growth sector for the England. And HDRS is Health Data Research Service that we're pulling together all the data, making that available both for academic research, hospital research, as well as pharmaceuticals and life sciences research. That really gives us a plank of our data and digital foundations. As we are in BCS, I wanted to just have a few words on what that means for the digital profession. So the things in dark blue are things that I think we should be leading nationally. So what's the capability, job roles, competencies? Been doing some work with Red IP and yourselves, really making sure that we've got the education material. We've been crowdsourcing some of that from lots of industry. We want to really create a curriculum for that, and then really making sure that we are setting the bar for digital leaders of the future and creating the communities. There's lots of things that we want, you know, it's locally to be led, which is very much about what your local systems need. How do we work closely with academia and industry to make sure that the profession actually thrives and survives? Very much about learning and skill pathways. The technology is moving so fast now. How do we make sure the people on the ground actually maintain their competencies? How do we create a professionally developed organisation and skill set so that we actually will have CPDs, you know, like the financial community and some of the medical communities. That's something that I want to do some work with next year. And then just finalise, and I'll give time for some questions. Is changed the wrong slide, sorry, too many computers. This is a snapshot of DDAT. It's a census in 2024. And quite a long tail, isn't it? But I think as we move forward, the distribution's going to move from IT ops, I think, to some of these other roles a bit more as we digitalise more. So how are we getting our workforce ready for that change to make sure it's not just about computer science, but it's actually about some of those other things? I suspect cybersecurity is going to go up significantly just because of where we are. But 41,000 DDAT staff across the NHS. That's a hell of a workforce if we can motivate and garner that output. So that's kind of one of the tasks that we have. Yes. And I finish that well.
Ming and I have known each other for a few years, so I've saved my most difficult question up for today. Please feel free to be as difficult as possible with Ming. I know. So I'm a non-executive director in a hospital in England. My reflection is we are struggling to have the capacity to do everything that the centre is asking us to do, both digitally and also in terms of the financial position, in terms of transformation, in terms of working in the system. So it's a really hard place to be at the minute. And I was also just reflecting as you were speaking that the transformation you're asking for requires boards to think quite differently around our risk appetite, around technology, and also how we view success and failure. And again, it feels the centre's view of success and failure is quite binary. You're either successful or you're toast. It feels a bit not you. You're much too nice. So I just kind of, how will we need to think differently at that kind of board executive leadership level if we are going to deliver the changes that you're talking about?
So I think two things. First of all, the digital profession or the DDAT profession are friends. The schools get out of the hole that they're in. I think too often we're seen as a cost centre, not as actually a value centre. If you think about what we need to do in the back office to help, what we need to do with waiting lists, all of that is dependent on using some techniques that technology provides, right? That will mean a different way of allocating work. And also, not just the risk, but the ability to fail. All these things are going to carry out. So how do we make smaller products do more things? I actually, a friend of mine was we were discussing last night. There's a huge amount that we do that's really manual. The CIOs are really struggling because they're trying to keep the lid on to actually experiment and do different things. That would be my sense of it. And then the black and white, yes, it's the centre, we're doing exactly the same as you're describing with our execs. And also in the programmes that we're driving from the SR this year for next year, I've made an ask of the teams to say 50% on technology and 50% on change, because it's the change adoption that will make the difference. It's not the technology.
It's interesting. Thank you.
I'm Ian Thompson. I'll declare an interest that I work in Scotland, but I'm going to talk about my experience of relatives in England, so it's relevant to you. They live in a part of the England where there is normally a shared care record, yet the exact thing that you were talking about of between one trust and another, information not flowing, is happening. So I really welcome what you're proposing. My question is, how do we encourage mindset in trusts to get them to talk to each other and work together collaboratively rather than trying to compete against each other so that we get that patient-centric, patient-focused approach?
I think competition is quite ingrained. Right, and it's not competition
I know it's not competition.
in the way that you would
in
see in
initial
industry,
sense.
but it's competition because most trusts are trying to keep their shit together, excuse my language. It's not an easy, as you know, as Will said, it's not an easy environment. I think with the way that we're looking at more locality-based care and your population, that will help, that the leadership will be driving that. I think the other part of it is there are some legal, what I say, grey areas in the law that we will be trying to overcome with the NHS bill to simplify some of the data sharing requirements for industry share data. So I think that will then lift it a bit because, you know, with some of the COPI regulations that we're moving forward with, it would just take the greyness out and make it much clearer the intent to share.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
Then I continue.
So I just have a few questions here, and the first one is, yes, really looking into the 10-year plan and looking into the government side of the whole thing with the NHS England and everything going on, which I don't work for NHS England, I work for NHS Trust, but the uncertainty out there is still one of the major things that baffles someone like me, and also really looking into the work that is still planning and going on in place is the government the government announcement of the staff and everything, is it having any impact on this 10-year plan program that NHS England is trying to
Talking
do?
about the merger of NHS
Yes,
England
yes.
in the Department of Health. Yes. It's quite difficult. We're trying to hold two conflicting things and still make progress at the moment. So conflicting messages, you know, you need to be 50% smaller. You need to merge with DHSC. And quite frankly, in the digital data area, I've got roughly 4,000 staff across the patch in NHS England. DHSC has about 400 that work in this area. So I would say the merger delight of you can get 50% savings out of it is quite far from where we are. Of course, we can save money. I think we just need to do things quite differently and therefore release money in the way that we work, probably the way that we spend money, whether we're building right. Yeah, so it will have an impact, but we're really trying to hold both because the merger won't happen, say, until probably towards the end of 2027.
Okay, that's fine. Then the other question I have is regarding the health data research service you mentioned. I used to work in a research team before I moved to my current role. I currently work as a performance analyst, and looking into a lot of data we generate, looking into how we could actually use our data for research and things like that. But I've always had this back, like a not being successful in that aspect. And one of the major things is by the time maybe trying to apply for any of this maybe research that you could do with NHS data, it's healthcare professional, it's more or less most of the healthcare professional FIDIP and everything is not yet incorporated in that aspect of where you could actually claim it as healthcare professional to apply for maybe funding to be part of research. So I really don't know if there's anything.
Just in the interest of time, I guess the whole part of health data research is to make the legal basis for sharing much clearer.
Okay.
To make data available for academic researchers as well as NHS researchers as well as life sciences. So it's going to be set up for that.
Okay.
Thanks, Will. I've just got one question. I'm Sebastian Alexander. I'm a GP in Cambridge. I also work with NHS England on the digital safety team in TD. And so you know, I chair the safety group. I suppose my big concerns at the moment are the evidence base around the changes that are being implemented. First of all, it seems like to me, that we're sort of working out a strategy as we go. So is there any evidence from other countries that things have worked well? My first thing. And then the second quick comment is make sure that things are being implemented safely with all this change going on. That's my big concern, I suppose.
So I guess as we went through the 10-year plan, there's quite a lot of evidence of other countries that was taken into consideration. It's a single patient record. India's had one for a long time. You know, Danes are doing it. There's a number of different countries doing that. So we're adopting our version of that. I do think we will need to create some of the evidence as we go along for AI in particular. And I think a big part of what Price Forbes is doing with your team is really making sure that we do have some guardrails. I will say that it comes back to that risk aversiveness. People are just going to pick it up and do it anyway. So we have colleagues everywhere that are doing this stuff in the background. That's more dangerous than let's move forward, collect the evidence and make sure we learn together. So some of this is about making it more transparent and getting those guardrails in so that we can collect the data and understand as we go along. Because if we don't, you know, something's going to go really wrong somewhere.
Greg Sharman, I'm a exec director and CIO at Turning Point. We're a health and social care company. We're also a charity, part of the third sector. You make a very compelling case around the 4 areas of focus. But when I consider some of those marginalized, that 20% we're not focusing on are typically borne the brunt within the third sector and the more complex and more difficult and challenging cases to support in terms of health. When you consider the shift to community, when you consider the shift to prevention, my concern when I look at that slide is the focus is very clinical. When you consider determinants of health, of 20% are clinical, the rest are behavioral, social, wider determinants. My worry as a third sector leader is that we're lost in the conversation. And that supply chain you talk about when it comes to health and being properly patient-centered is lost in the what seems like a very clinical and NHS-focused world. And actually, my ask is that we start to consider and integrate our colleagues in the third sector into the conversation, because we're missing a huge slice of the population. We're also missing a huge slice of how we integrate and properly manage care for our populations.
So I was asked to come and talk about the digital parts of the NHS, the 10-year plan. So that's what I've done. First of all, I'm not dismissing the 20% at all, but I think it's really important. So some of the things that we're doing to enable neighbourhood teams, it's very much about that connectivity. Some of the stuff we're doing with FTP is very much working with local systems so that they can bring in the third sector. I was at mental health team yesterday because what we're trying to we're trying to accelerate support for mental health because of crisis support local. And that's very much using the technology we've already got for a different use case and then brings it together. What we've done in the FTP licenses is anybody that's providing NHS care that allows third sector to come together to use licenses in that way. So very much thinking about that. Neighbourhood will be transformative. So one of the hackathons we're having with programme teams, what we're trying to do is bring together primary care, urgent emergency care, data and digital, is to say, actually, how can we reimagine this pathway? Because people only end up in A&E because they don't have other choices. So who else needs to be in the room in order to drive out some of those things? So apologies, but yeah, we are thinking about it. Thank you.
Tito.
Right. So Tito Castillo, I'm the strategy and policy lead for the faculty and an enterprise architect. So I would suggest that both enterprise architecture and data management capabilities across the NHS need to improve. And without that improvement, without that maturity, the implementation of AI services will struggle. I just wondered, first of all, do you agree with that? And if so, what will you be doing to improve those areas?
You know, I do agree with you totally. And I think sometimes it's the separation of digital and technology from data. analysis. And actually what we're seeing is the coming together of those two things, which is really how do you use the tech to actually surface the data at the right time in the right place. We can do lots and lots to drive better data quality. I have a strong belief, rightly, wrongly, that unless we use the data, it's never going to get improved. If we keep the data in the annals of those analysts that only do their own performance, it's never going to change. So some of this is really about surfacing that, putting some of the guardrails around it, so see where we need to improve. Because we don't collect all the data we need either. So a lot of the data we collect, as I said, is around services. We need much more data around. So working, points, we need to get some of that data. In my analysis team, we've done quite a lot of work with people like Kaki to get the wider determinants of health so that we can actually understand households more, which will then go into the population health type pieces. Now we need to bring that together in how do we change services using that information.
I really want to ask a question, but I'll go to the head. Jan.
I've got a question, more of a statement probably, comment online. It's about person-centered care, digital tech, bringing them together into a sort of integrated solution. And it's saying that we need a generic model to help integrate solutions in a socio manner. So what are we doing?
I'm sure you could make it into a question, mate, woman of your experience.
One of the things we're looking at doing is, and I veer away from it quite often because it's a bit of a buzzword. We would love to create a digital twin of the NHS and the people within it so that we can actually use the technology to forward forecast and propose.
No, you've got another 15 minutes.
You can get out of it.
We're just having a discussion about Ming's presentation skills. She should have taken longer and taken your question. Sorry, carry on.
So I think we can absolutely do that. So there's a lot more interaction that we can do in terms of better understanding. But that needs more near real-time data, needs much more granular data around the situation of the person in order to do that. I'm not a big fan of doing lots of work on a socioeconomic kind of model and then it doesn't go anywhere. So what I would really like to do is, like some of the work I've done in the past in supply chain, when you actually have real-time data, you can then forward forecast using modelling to then predict what's going to happen, and then how do you then take the planning to that extent. So I think that's where we need to get to.
I really have to ask my question, and I'm going to come to this side. I'm sorry. One of the areas that I've kind of thought for a while is we have got a very clear analog model of healthcare that's been around since 1940. And I'm yet to see anything from the centre around actually what is the digital business model for healthcare that actually is the design that we're trying to get to. And I think all of the discussion around data and architecture, etc., I think are all good conversations and the right conversation to have. But are we missing that operating model, business model perspective that there's actually, this is in reality how I as a citizen are going to engage with this service moving forward?
Yeah. So that's some of the things we're doing now, which is a set of reimagine workshops with both the central policy teams as well as people from the system. So we held one recently on cancer, reimagine how you would manage cancer differently. How does the data actually enable that? I would say, well, I'm not a big fan of the centre's going to come up with this model and then everyone's that's like I have a national role. No, I'm under no perception that everyone will follow. I think there are some real good practices elsewhere. What we do have is some of the central movements like the NHS app. How do we stitch those services together in an architecture that works? What we need to then say is, here's a pattern, here's an architectural pattern that locally you can adopt. You can have access to those services in this way, that we slept on with it. I think we are going to trial some of this. The version what you're talking about is probably going to be in the modern services framework, where there's a number of clinical pathways that are being reimagined properly and done end to end. But I think it's a good plan. You just need to get them.
And I guess at some point these collide with the reality of institutions that exist today. Okay, hands up on, keep your hands down on that side, I suppose. There's a gentleman right at the back and then I'll come.
Thanks. John Ainsworth, University of Manchester. When I look at the slide that has the 4 key applications on it, the NHS app, shared patient record, federated data platform, and National Health Research Data Service, they all seem to have different application focuses, but have a common underlying data structure that they need. To what extent do you think it's going to be possible to have one convergent data layer that feeds all these applications, or will we have 4 of these things in parallel replicating infrastructure?
It needs to have one single layer or a mechanism to share. That's the aim, because it would be terrible if we did 4 of them.
Still better than the hundreds we've got today.
Hi, Jeanette Fraser. I work in Kent and Medway. I'm the South East branch lead for AFA. I also lead on the Women in Health Data Network nationally, and I'm the deputy chair for the Digital Skills Development Network in the South East. Promise I'll get to a question in a moment. Looking at the census, we actually had a look at it last Friday. We've got the 2025 results in for Kent and Medway. We have a 400 person loss, which is absolutely phenomenal. The Integrated Care Board blueprint basically means that a lot of digital people within integrated care boards are not going to have jobs at the end of the year. Digital skills development networks are not going to get funded after next year. For those that aren't self-sufficient at the moment, they're going to cease to exist in those areas, creating sort of like inequalities in kind of like digital upskilling nationally. People are not where they are supposed to be skills-wise in all of the DDAT roles. We are in so much deficits at the moment. But the people on the ground, what kind of like hope is there that we can actually deliver any of this? Sorry, big question.
Yeah, I think it's answer that. It's it's really sad. I think that's your question, really, wasn't it, earlier on? And it breaks my heart. I'm gonna get really emotional.
I'm going to finish off and I'm going to ask Ming to give us 3 reasons to be cheerful at this. But I think so. It's a point very well made, and I think has definitely heard it. Lady here, sorry.
I'm Hillary. I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Coventry, and what I'm really interested in is you have your chart here, and you have user-centered design at the end. What do you mean by those user-centered design roles? And I'm really interested in interface design within the NHS role in terms of clinician and patient facing. Patient facing, front door, we've got the NHS, but the interfaces that all these different clinicians are seeing, I'm finding they're all very different from each other. And are you leaving that to the supplier to drive that, or the NHS Trust? And how are you patching all these different components together?
I don't think there's one answer, is there? Because I mean, it's dependent on the use case.
Okay.
It depends on who's actually using technology that you're driving. So I don't think there's a single answer.
Okay.
I think everybody's going to do their user-centered design because nobody wants to develop technology that doesn't work. So I think what's behind your question is how do we normalize it and how do we get more consensus of it? I think nationally there is a push for doing things differently with the NHS app, and that we already have a bank of like 25,000 people that test the app. I think in a way we're very focused on, can you see the right colours? Is the layout, is the language right for those things? One of the things I said to the app team is we sort out language that will kind of help enormously, right? But for other products, what we found very much is you really need to sit alongside those people that are using it. You really drive the improvement. This isn't about signing something here and then. We're not throwing stuff over the wall. What we really want to do is sit side by side and make sure that we can. So we work. I think the trick we need to pull off is create sufficient kind of optionality within the design so that people can branch off.
Are you assuming the design is controlled in-house or they're buying a ready-made product off the shelf?
Both. I mean,
Okay.
you know, I'm not going to teach the industry how to do their user-centered design, but I do quite often think that we get accused of in the NHS of not adopting things that have worked out elsewhere when those things haven't actually been tested within the NHS. So, you know, we have a plethora of EPRs at the moment that aren't really for our system, but we've adopted them badly. But actually, there wasn't much user research in those systems that make it work for our system. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the power base in some of those technologies is not equal.
Yeah.
So I think it's dependent on what technology we're using.
And then with your diagram here, you've tagged user-centered design. Could you sort of describe to me what that role you see that being sort of developed into as this shift away from the IT departments into these more different roles?
I think it's just more the digitally native programs that you would do, which means you have user-centered design as part of everything.
Okay.
We've got 5 minutes time. I'm going to be respectful. Not going to be respectful. The time. Mandy, I'll come to you. You take this gentleman, then I'll come. Give me the last question then.
Hi, Kim.
Sorry, come on. Thanks, Will. I'm Gareth Thomas, Digital Innovation Director at Health Innovation Manchester. I'm clinical by background. Building on Will's question, really, so two of the products I'm responsible for, the secure data environment and the Greater Manchester Care Record. And one of the challenges with system level investment is where does the value fall within the system? And it's not always at the place of the individual or the organisation who's investing. So I wonder if you've got any thoughts about how we can incentivise differently within the 10-year plan so that all organisations are incentivised to invest, but knowing that the value may fall somewhere else within that chain.
Part of it, we're looking at digital tariffs. So how do we encourage adoption through a tariff mechanism? And it's partly because we've got an exec who are very acute orientated at the moment. So, you know, actually having a financial mechanism that drives investment, which then helps us all above the line, will be important. Similarly for research is how do we incentivize research funding so that it actually is a contribution to the wider good. So HDRS will be linking, how do we link the subnational secure environments together? How do we work with industry? So some of the use cases are directly going through to a subnational and then linking into a national, looking at the protocols for clinical trials so that you can start in a smaller area and then maximise those protocols across the country. So those are types of things. And then how do we make sure we fund it in a way that helps the behaviours, not just development.
My name's Kim. I think Will is getting me back for getting his name wrong earlier on.
No, I'm just terrible with
It's just,
names.
I know.
I know. That's fine. Right, I'm Kim. I'm program manager at Fed IP. So I'm really pleased to see CPD up there, and I believe that a happy and valued workforce is a productive workforce. And seeing CPD there, I think, is absolutely fantastic. But how are we going to change the culture to allow all of these people to do their CPD and have the same opportunities that our clinical colleagues do?
It comes back to if IT, technology, digital seen as a cost centre, you'll never get that. Clinical is not seen as a cost centre, it's seen as a must-have in NHS, right? So how do we do that? Finance have managed it. So part of what I'm trying to do is learn from the finance colleagues. How did they set it up? I think we're going to need to, it's going to need to get some ministers on board, I think. That's the only way I think. I've been thinking about this problem for a while. I think we need to just get the ministerial steer. This is what we need to do.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to make one last statement. And then I'm going to ask you that, three reasons to be cheerful question. I think with Fed IP, with the professional bodies in the room, there's a real resource here in terms of how do we have a register of those folks that are working digital? How do we know who's which I think. I was on the Rencom for CDIO. I then had an argument with my chief executive as to why a clinical qualification was relevant for a CDIO role on a digital professional qualification. And I think there is an important discussion that you and I will have and others around actually recognizing digital as a profession that has an important and actually support and contribute to the agenda, as you've said, I very plainly today. So I'm looking forward to doing that. So my last question, Ming, give me 3 reasons to be cheerful.
Before I do that, I think GDS has done quite a lot of work. And then we need to build on that. We need to stop thinking about NHS as being slightly separate from the government.
Sure.
So 3 reasons to be cheerful. Right. We've never had this discussion around data and digital underpinning a 10-year plan. Let's face it. I've worked a long time in the NHS and it's been 2 lines in operating guidance. That's all you normally get. So actually to have the 10-year plan say this is digital enabled thing need to embrace. The funding, the SR, whether it stays ring fence is another matter, but there was an attempt to ring fence a 10 billion for digital and data. I think that's reasonable. I actually think the last thing is hearts and minds on the. We've done quite a lot of engagement with chief execs, trusts and systems over the summer. And there's a bit of a turning point in saying, tell us what the core competencies are that we need, what the core capabilities that we need, so that we can dock in rather than we want to build our own. So a lot of that, I think, is a real turning in the way that system hasn't translated into resources and all of that, because I think timing is just pretty bad for that. But I think it will come back. I think my plea to the kind of audience and also the profession is don't lose heart, but please act professionally. So engage and collaborate, because if you don't, we'll lose this opportunity. It's become, well, we invested loads of money and nothing happened. Or, we invested loads of money and we didn't see the change happen. So as I said at the beginning, this isn't about technology, this is about hearts and minds. How do we embrace that locally?
Thank you, Ming. Your ordeal is over.